From the pristine observation deck of Nexus Prime, interdimensional researchers watched the nomadic merchant fleet. Their adherence to capitalism felt like a quaint, almost amusing anachronism in the vast cosmic tapestry. These cosmic capitalists were a curiosity, nothing more. Nexus Prime existed as a silent sentinel, dedicated to the meticulous cataloging and analysis of lower-dimensional civilizations. Across countless realities, its advanced sensors probed and recorded, seeking patterns in the chaos of emergent cultures. The nomadic merchant fleet, with its bustling, seemingly primitive exchanges, had been classified as a subject of purely anthropological interest. Its observed trajectory through the dimensional currents offered a unique, if somewhat unrefined, case study in socioeconomic resilience. Their mission was to understand, not interfere, maintaining a detached academic distance from the subjects of their gaze. Initial sensor data painted a perplexing picture. The merchant fleet comprised an astonishing array of vessels, each seemingly a patchwork of disparate technologies and design philosophies. There were no uniform schematics, no centralized manufacturing standards, leading researchers to conclude the fleet was fundamentally unoptimized. Yet, despite this apparent disarray, their logistical networks functioned with baffling efficacy. Trade routes that defied conventional efficiency metrics somehow delivered goods with unwavering reliability. Supply chains that should have collapsed under their own weight operated with robust, almost elegant precision. It was a paradox of chaotic efficiency, a system that should not have worked, yet demonstrably thrived. The researchers noted this anomaly with a puzzled analytical curiosity, filing it away as another intriguing quirk of their primitive subjects. The consensus among the senior researchers was clear and unequivocal. The nomadic merchant fleet held no strategic value. Their technology, while functional within its own dimensional context, offered no military threat or advanced scientific insight relevant to Nexus Prime's higher dimensional understanding. There were no exotic weapon signatures, no hidden propulsion systems, no signs of a unified command structure beyond basic mercantile coordination. Their primary utility was deemed to be as a social study, a fascinating, if ultimately insignificant, example of commerce persisting in the most extreme itinerant environments. It was an assessment born of supreme confidence, a self-assured dismissal that echoed through the pristine, ordered halls of Nexus Prime. Then, a peculiar transaction was intercepted, one that briefly snagged the attention of the linguistics and cultural analysis chamber. A merchant vessel was observed trading what its manifest vaguely termed conceptual shields and pattern disruption dampeners. The terms themselves were an enigma. Were they archaic metaphors for some crude physical barrier? Or perhaps primitive jargon for a form of localized jamming technology? Researchers debated, ultimately concluding that such abstract concepts were merely the merchants' unsophisticated way of describing mundane protective measures, or, at best, rudimentary counter-surveillance. The idea that these terms might represent actual, tangible technology, let alone something capable of influencing fundamental reality, was dismissed with a touch of patronizing amusement. It was filed under cultural idiosyncrasies, a quaint linguistic artifact from a less enlightened civilization, a faint ripple of incongruity lost in the vast ocean of data. Within the sterile analytical confines of Research Station Nexus Prime's socio-economic modeling lab, the interdimensional researchers grappled with a perplexing enigma. Their sophisticated algorithms, designed to dissect and predict the most intricate market fluctuations across countless dimensions, simply failed when applied to the nomadic merchant fleet. Here, alongside tangible goods, rare minerals, exotic energy cells, computational matrices, were transactions involving concepts as abstract as stability, information integrity, and entropic balance. Holographic charts, usually a cascade of predictable supply and demand, instead flickered with value fluctuations for these intangibles. The underlying logic of these markets, where the very fabric of local reality seemed to hold a quantifiable price, remained stubbornly elusive, defying every known principle of interdimensional economic theory. It was an intellectual puzzle, intriguing, yet profoundly frustrating, hinting at an economy built on principles far beyond material gain. The observational lenses of Nexus Prime then focused on a bustling merchant trade hub, where a heated dispute had erupted between two vessels. The researchers braced for the expected escalation, a calculated threat, a tactical repositioning, perhaps even a brief, contained skirmish over disputed cargo. Instead, the conflict was resolved through a complex, almost ritualistic entropic balancing exchange. Energy flows, visible only to the most sensitive sensors, passed between the two ships, not in aggression, but in a delicate, almost restorative dance. The immediate environment around them, previously agitated by the dispute, seemed to calm, its minor distortions smoothing out. It was a resolution that appeared to restore equilibrium not just to the transaction, but to the very local space-time, leaving the observers with a sense of profound, if confused, peace. Yet, as the researchers continued their detached observations from Nexus Prime's long-range sensor station, subtle anomalies began to appear at the absolute edge of the observed sector. Faint flickers and distortion artifacts rippled across the deep void, like imperfections in the cosmic canvas. Initially, these were dismissed. Sensor malfunctions, perhaps. Background cosmic noise from uncharted phenomena. The vastness of interdimensional space was, after all, prone to unpredictable energetic discharges. The anomalies were too sporadic, too indistinct to warrant serious investigation. They were logged, categorized as inconsequential, and largely forgotten, mere statistical outliers in a universe of endless data. The unsettling feeling they evoked was quietly suppressed. However, closer analysis of the merchant fleet's astrogation patterns began to unveil a disturbing paradox. Their trade routes, while undeniably extensive, included detours that defied all economic sense. Ships would veer into regions designated by Nexus Prime as unstable zones or gravitational anomalies, areas of high risk offering no apparent premium for their passage. These were not shortcuts, nor were they rich in undiscovered resources. The logic was inscrutable. Why would a fleet driven by profit intentionally navigate such perils without clear gain? The researchers, initially merely perplexed, found a growing suspicion taking root. These were not the random wanderings of opportunists. These were purposeful, if inexplicable, trajectories. The true unsettling nature of these detours became starkly evident when a lone merchant ship, a vessel previously seen trading in conceptual shields, executed an abrupt, almost violent maneuver. With no detectable warning from Nexus Prime's instruments, the ship swerved, its engines flaring in an impossible burst of lateral thrust, narrowly avoiding a localized reality ripple. Moments later, Nexus Prime's long-range sensors registered the distortion, a shimmering temporal anomaly exactly where the merchant ship had been. The timing was impossible. The merchant vessel had reacted before the anomaly even registered on interdimensional sensors, displaying either a precognitive awareness or a class of sensory technology utterly beyond the researchers' comprehension. A cold question began to form. How did they know before we did? The subtle flickers, once easily dismissed as minor sensor aberrations, now asserted a more tangible presence within Nexus Prime. What began as intermittent static across diagnostic screens escalated into brief, unsettling power fluctuations that rippled through the research station's core systems. Lights in the sensor bay would momentarily dim, then surge with unnatural intensity, followed by bursts of corrupted data streaming across consoles. Strange, incomprehensible symbols momentarily overlaying critical readouts. No longer could these phenomena be filed away as simple glitches or cosmic background noise. The unseen threat was growing, its touch extending from the void to the very heart of the interdimensional observers. Amidst the mounting chaos, a junior analyst tasked with filtering the deluge of anomalous sensor data made a discovery that would soon unravel their carefully constructed understanding of reality. Embedded within the erratic pulses and distorted streams, a recurring structure began to emerge. It was not random noise, but intricate, complex mathematical patterns, self-generating fractals and equations that seemed to weave themselves into the fabric of the distortions. These were not static. They evolved, shifting and replicating with an unsettling internal logic. The analyst, initially bewildered, felt a touch of cold apprehension. This was not a malfunction. This was a message, or perhaps a process, far beyond their current comprehension. The junior analyst's findings, presented with a mix of urgency and trepidation, met with the predictable skepticism of the senior researchers. Dismissed as an advanced form of data corruption, perhaps even an elaborate, unforeseen hoax perpetrated by some lower-dimensional entity, The radical implications were waved away. Decades of established interdimensional physics and observation protocols dictated that such phenomena were impossible, or at best, natural but extreme anomalies. To entertain the notion of sentient evolving mathematical constructs was to abandon foundational paradigms, a step too far for minds accustomed to the orderly cataloging of the universe. The warnings were ignored, the true nature of the threat casually discarded, but reality itself would soon provide a terrifying counter-argument to their dismissals. The mathematical patterns, no longer confined to data streams, began to subtly alter physical laws in observable space around Nexus Prime. Distant nebulas shimmered with impossible colors, light bending in defiance of known optics, while localized gravity fields fluctuated, causing minor, disorienting shifts within the station itself. Objects on the observation deck would briefly phase out of existence, only to reappear moments later, unsettlingly out of place. The patterns were now visibly embedded in the fabric of space, a vast, shimmering tapestry of hostile logic rewriting the very rules of existence around them. Disbelief turned to a cold, creeping fear, mingled with a terrifying awe. As panic rippled through Nexus Prime, the nomadic merchant fleet, a beacon of apparent chaos, executed a silent, astonishing transformation. Unnoticed by the researchers, whose instruments were now failing under the assault on physical laws, the fleet began to move. Hundreds of disparate ships, once seemingly haphazard in their trajectories, now shifted with synchronized, impossible precision. They formed intricate, dynamic patterns, each movement a response to the unfolding dimensional distortions. These were not random evasions, but coordinated, protective maneuvers, as if the fleet not only anticipated the reality-fraying effects, but actively counteracted them. A profound, unsettling calm amidst the cosmic storm. Then, the disparate mathematical patterns, which had been subtly unraveling reality, coalesced into a singular, monstrous entity, a vast, shimmering construct of pure, hostile logic, bloomed in the void between Nexus Prime and the merchant fleet. It was a living equation, a colossal, ever-shifting lattice of symbols and forces that actively and aggressively began to rewrite local physical laws. It no longer merely distorted, it commanded. The target of its destructive calculus became clear: Research Station Nexus Prime. A profound existential terror gripped the observers. This was not a natural phenomenon, not a glitch. This was an attack, orchestrated by something that defied all known definitions of life, or indeed, of reality itself. The cosmic tapestry around Research Station Nexus Prime began to unravel with a horrifying, deliberate precision. The vast mathematical construct, now coalesced into a shimmering, malevolent lattice, reached out, its tendrils of pure logic touching the very fabric of local reality. Causality itself became a suggestion, not a law. Light, once a constant, now bent at impossible angles, its spectrum bleeding into hues unknown to any dimension. Gravity fluctuated, causing objects within Nexus Prime to briefly float sideways before slamming back into place, defying their own inertia. Walls rippled like disturbed water, their molecular bonds momentarily dissolving, only to reconstitute in slightly altered forms. Research instruments, designed to measure and quantify the universe, shrieked in protest, their readouts displaying paradoxes that threatened to tear apart the minds of those who tried to comprehend them. The station, a bastion of interdimensional understanding, began to twist, its sleek, engineered perfection yielding to the aggressive, reality-rewriting force that dominated the void. On the bridge of Nexus Prime, the last vestiges of scientific detachment evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling realization. This was no natural phenomenon, no cosmic event, no random distortion of space-time. The patterns, the localized law violations, the systematic deconstruction of their dimensional reality, it was all orchestrated. The researchers finally accepted that the mathematical construct was a conscious entity, a hostile intelligence of pure logic with malevolent intent. It was not merely causing chaos. It was an attack, a deliberate act of conceptual warfare aimed at unmaking their existence. Their advanced minds, once confident in their dominion over scientific principles, were confronted with an enemy that understood those principles better than they did, and wielded them as weapons. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped them as they understood their helplessness against a destructive force so alien, so fundamental, it defied the very definition of life and death. Panic erupted across Nexus Prime. Alarms shrieked, their urgent red pulses flashing through corridors where personnel now fled in disarray. Consoles sparked and died, their holographic displays flickering into incoherent static. The very air seemed to thicken, then thin, as the equation's influence permeated the station's structural integrity. Bulkheads groaned, some collapsing under impossible stresses, as local gravity fields twisted and inverted. The advanced interdimensional researchers, who had calmly charted the multiverse for eons, were reduced to desperate figures, scrambling for survival against an enemy that defied physical engagement. Their sophisticated technology, once their greatest asset, was now useless, dissolving into meaningless data streams. Yet, amidst the escalating chaos emanating from Nexus Prime, the nomadic merchant fleet remained. Their previous, chaotic and disparate nature was gone. Against the backdrop of a reality being actively unmade, the hundreds of vessels held their formation with an unnerving, almost serene precision. Each ship, from the smallest scout to the largest cargo hauler, executed subtle, synchronized shifts, maintaining perfect spacing and alignment. They were a beacon of improbable stability amidst the cosmic storm, their hulls glinting under the distorted starlight. The fleet moved with a silent, purposeful cohesion that spoke not of fear, but of an ancient, practiced readiness. It was an unsettling calm, a mysterious order that defied the researchers, understanding, hinting at a hidden purpose far beyond mere commerce. Then, from the heart of that eerily organized fleet, a single ship broke formation. It was a vessel previously observed trading, conceptual shields, a seemingly unremarkable transport, its hull scarred by countless journeys through mundane space. Without fanfare or warning, it detached, its thrusters flaring with controlled intensity. It moved not away from the encroaching horror, but directly towards it, on an intercept course with the expanding mathematical equation. The merchant ship, a tiny point of defiance against the vast, shimmering construct of hostile logic, sailed with an inexplicable resolve into the swirling maelstrom, an act that defied every known principle of self-preservation. It was a move born of either ultimate courage or profound, unfathomable ignorance. On Nexus Prime, the researchers watched in horrified disbelief. Their frantic instruments could not explain the merchant ship's actions, nor could their logic comprehend its survival. It was a suicidal approach, a tiny vessel throwing itself against an entity that erased physical laws as easily as a child might erase a drawing. Their advanced minds, calibrated to decipher the cosmos, could only register incomprehensible doom. How could any primitive vessel, one designed for trade, possibly survive contact with an enemy that unmade reality itself? They recoiled from the main view screen, unable to process the bewildering, desperate gamble unfolding before them, convinced they were witnessing the final, futile act of a doomed civilization. The solitary merchant vessel, once dismissed as a quaint anachronism, held its position with an impossible steadfastness. Before it, the sentient mathematical equation pulsed and expanded. A vast, shimmering lattice of hostile logic, attempting to unravel the very fabric of existence. Yet the small ship, a mere speck against the cosmic terror, defied it. Its simple, utilitarian hull, designed for commerce, not conflict, glowed with a faint, internal luminescence under the relentless assault. It shimmered, warped at the edges, but did not break. The researchers on Nexus Prime watched, bewildered, as the primitive vessel resisted reality-rewriting forces that should have annihilated it instantly. Within the command center of Nexus Prime, chaos reigned. But it was an intellectual chaos, born of disbelief. Researchers, whose interdimensional instruments could map entire universes, found themselves utterly blind. Frantically, they attempted to scan the merchant ship, but their readouts were a cacophony of impossible data, temporal distortions, localized causality paradoxes, and energy signatures that simply should not exist. Hope and abject terror warred within them. This vessel, which their advanced sensors had once categorized as unremarkable, was now an enigma, defying every known law of physics and logic. The sentient equation, as if sensing the merchant ship's unexpected resilience, surged. A wave of pure, deconstructive logic washed over the vessel, a terrifying silent scream meant to rewrite its very structure. The merchant ship's hull rippled violently, mathematical symbols attempting to tear through its plating, to dissolve its molecular bonds, to erase its existence from the dimensional framework. Internal lights flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish entirely. For a moment it seemed that the merchant's defiance was futile, that even its hidden strength would be insufficient against a foe that struck at the fundamental rules of reality itself. Yet, impossibly, it held. Then, from previously unseen ports along the merchant ship's seemingly mundane hull, something new emerged. It was not a projectile, no conventional energy blast, nor any weapon known to the interdimensional researchers. Instead, a vast, shimmering cloud began to deploy, expanding rapidly into the void. Ethereal and fluid, it caught the unnatural glow of the hostile equation, appearing as a fine, almost invisible mist. It flowed outward, defying the vacuum of space, seemingly guided by an unseen will. The researchers on Nexus Prime watched, astonished and bewildered, as the merchant vessel unleashed this mysterious, silent counter-response. The shimmering cloud expanded, and then, under the intense scrutiny of Nexus Prime's desperate sensors, it resolved. What appeared was not gas nor dust, but countless self-replicating nanites, each a microscopic marvel of engineering. They were tiny, complex machines, humming with an unfathomable purpose. These nanites did not attack with kinetic force or energy beams. They engaged directly with the mathematical constructs of the hostile equation. They began to interact, to dismantle, to unwrite the symbols of pure logic, consuming them with an eerie, surgical precision. This was the merchant's hidden power, a technology designed not for physical combat, but for the eradication of abstract threats. The universe had misjudged them entirely. The nanite swarm surged forward, a tide of microscopic intelligence engulfing the monstrous equation. It was not destruction in the conventional sense, it was erasure. Mathematical symbols, once vibrant and hostile, simply vanished as the nanites passed over them, leaving no trace behind. The vast, shimmering construct of pure logic visibly shrank, its influence receding. In the wake of the nanite swarm, physical laws, previously warped and contorted, began to stabilize. The horrifying instability caused by the equation dissipated, replaced by the familiar, unwavering constants of dimensional reality. The merchants were not merely fighting, they were deleting the unthinkable. On Nexus Prime, a stunned silence descended. The frantic calls, the desperate analyses, the expressions of terror and disbelief, all melted away into an absolute, profound quiet. The researchers watched, their faces a mixture of awe, shame, and a dawning, terrifying understanding. Their previous arrogance, their dismissive view of the nomadic merchants, was utterly, irrevocably shattered. The primitive capitalists, the quaint traders, had just waged a war on fundamental reality, and won. They had saved Nexus Prime, and perhaps, far more, with a technology beyond the researchers' wildest comprehension. The void, once a serene canvas for distant stars, had become a crucible where the very fabric of existence was being contested. Here the nanite swarm, a shimmering tempest of microscopic machines, met the hostile mathematical equation. This was no clash of starships or energy beams, it was a battle of fundamentals, a silent, terrifying dance of pure logic against engineered counterlogic. The equation, a vast, glowing lattice of abstract symbols, attempted to rewrite the underlying code of reality, to unravel causality itself. But the nanites, countless and relentless, engaged it not with force, but with conceptual attrition. They swirled and pulsed, each infinitesimal unit a counter-argument, a negation, dissolving the geometric structures of the equation, consuming its syntax, erasing its very meaning. It was an intellectual war writ large, a profound, awe-inspiring struggle for the soul of the dimension, conducted in utter silence, yet reverberating with the weight of all that could be lost. As this abstract conflict raged, the broader nomadic merchant fleet, previously dismissed as a chaotic collection of disparate vessels, revealed a profound, unsettling cohesion. Far from passive observers, the hundreds of ships maintained their intricate formation with unnerving precision. Subtle energy pulses rippled between them, forming a vast, invisible network. Gravitational fields were meticulously adjusted, not for navigation, but to stabilize the immediate dimensional environment, smoothing out the reality ripples generated by the equation's assault. Energy emissions from their seemingly mundane hulls pulsed in complex, synchronized patterns, clearly facilitating the nanite swarm's effectiveness, feeding it the raw conceptual energy it required. The researchers, watching from Nexus Prime, felt a dawning awe, a chilling realization that this entire fleet, this supposed collection of quaint capitalists, was a single vast and ancient defensive mechanism. Their chaos was a carefully orchestrated deception, spurred by desperation and a newfound, profound respect. The interdimensional research team threw every available resource into understanding their unexpected saviors. In the data forensics lab of Nexus Prime, encrypted fragments of merchant data logs, previously deemed impenetrable, began to yield their secrets. What emerged sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembled researchers. The logs, spanning millennia and countless dimensions, detailed not trade agreements, but a chilling history of, quote, pattern disruption events. Each record, meticulously archived, described encounters with entities akin to the sentient mathematical equation, threats that sought to unravel reality, and each, without fail, had been countered by similar means: the deployment of conceptual shields, pattern disruption dampeners, and the devastating, reality-erasing nanite swarms. This wasn't a sudden heroic act. It was a long, silent war, fought across the very fabric of existence, for longer than Nexus Prime had even existed. The pieces clicked into place, forging a truth that shattered every preconceived notion held by the interdimensional researchers. The nomadic merchant fleet were not merely capitalists. They were interdimensional guardians, protectors of the very stability of reality. Their elaborate trade routes, once seen as illogical detours, now made perfect sense as patrol patterns, defensive perimeters against conceptual incursions. Their goods, stability, information integrity, conceptual shields were not metaphors, but vital assets in their millennia-long struggle. Their capitalism was not a primitive economic system, but a sophisticated, decentralized mechanism to acquire the diverse resources, advanced knowledge, and strategic positioning necessary to maintain their defenses across countless dimensions. They traded to survive, to equip themselves, to defend all that existed from the things that sought to unmake it. This was not commerce as understood by Nexus Prime. This was the ultimate bargain, the exchange of trivial goods for the continued existence of reality itself. Finally, the nanite swarm completed its meticulous work. With a final, almost imperceptible ripple, the last vestiges of the hostile mathematical equation vanished. The vast, glowing lattice of symbols dissolved into nothingness, leaving no trace, no lingering distortion. Where chaos had reigned, a profound calm settled. Local reality snapped back into perfect equilibrium, the bending light straightening, the fluctuating gravity stabilizing, as if the terrifying threat had never existed. The air on Nexus Prime, previously thick with dread, was now filled with a different kind of silence. Relief, wonder, and a dawning horror at the true nature of the enemy the merchants had just erased. The impossible threat was gone, swallowed by an equally impossible defense. The merchant ship that had spearheaded the counterattack executed its final, understated act. From its hull, the nanite swarm seamlessly retracted, disappearing back into unseen ports. The ship's surface showed no signs of the profound battle it had just waged. No scorch marks, no stress fractures, just the familiar, somewhat ramshackle appearance the researchers had once found so amusing. It turned, rejoining the vast, silent armada, resuming its ordinary trading activities, as if it had merely completed a routine transaction. A silent sentinel, its extraordinary power once more hidden beneath a veneer of mundane commerce, the merchant fleet resumed its vigil, leaving the researchers of Nexus Prime to grapple with a reality far grander and more terrifying than they had ever conceived. The command center of Nexus Prime was gripped by a silence far heavier than any alarm. The advanced interdimensional researchers who had once observed with such detached amusement now stared at the view screen with a mixture of profound awe, gut-wrenching fear, and a dawning, crushing humility. Their meticulously constructed worldview, built on the bedrock of their own perceived superiority, had been shattered in a single, impossible instant. The primitive merchants, whom they had dismissed as quaint cosmic capitalists, were not merely survivors, they were the bulwark. Every data screen, once displaying patronizing analyses, now illuminated the merchant fleet in a blinding new light, a crucial, indispensable pillar of interdimensional stability. From the heart of this humbled realization, a new urgency surged. The lead researcher, their face etched with a newfound respect and a tremor that belied their centuries of detached study, moved to the communications array. All previous protocols, the carefully constructed barriers of non-interference and observational distance, were discarded without a second thought. An urgent, respectful hail was composed, its tone a stark contrast to the scientific detachment that had once defined their interactions. It was a request for audience, an admission of profound error, a desperate plea for understanding from beings they had so grievously underestimated. The communications array pulsed, a beacon of desperate hope in the vast, indifferent void. A moment stretched into an eternity then, a response. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying not a sleek, advanced bridge, but the unassuming interior of a merchant vessel. An aged merchant figure appeared, their features worn by countless journeys, their eyes holding a wisdom that spanned epochs. Their voice, when it came, was calm, resonant with the weight of ancient history, and entirely devoid of judgment or malice. "You seek understanding," the voice stated, accepting the communication with a quiet authority. Its message was direct, speaking not of profit or loss, but of balance and exchange. Terms the researchers now understood held a terrifying fundamental significance far beyond mere commerce. With an unsettling calm, the merchant began to speak, revealing a truth that reshaped the researchers' understanding of the cosmos itself. Their fleet, the merchant explained, had maintained its millennia-long vigil, acting as guardians against pattern corruptions, interdimensional breaches that threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality. Their trade, once seen as simple capitalism, was an intricate millennia-old system to acquire the diverse resources and esoteric knowledge essential for their defense. It was a global, or rather a multiversal, intelligence gathering and resource allocation network, seamlessly integrated into their ongoing silent war. The holographic projections flickered, illustrating not trade routes but defensive perimeters, the merchant fleet a living, moving barrier against unseen cosmic horrors. Then came the chilling revelation. The hostile mathematical equation, the entity that had almost undone Nexus Prime and threatened to rewrite their very existence, was not the enemy itself. It was merely a conceptual scout. The merchant's calm face contrasted sharply with the researchers' horrified expressions as a holographic map expanded, revealing a vast, unseen darkness beyond the known dimensional boundaries. A far greater, more complex interdimensional incursion was not just possible, it was imminent. The war, the merchant revealed, had not yet truly begun. The terrifying realization settled. The merchants had merely demonstrated a fraction of their capabilities against a fraction of the threat. The main view screen on Nexus Prime flickered with the image of the merchant elder, their ancient eyes holding a wisdom that now seemed boundless. The researchers, once so quick to dismiss, listened in humbled silence as the merchant began to elaborate on the true nature of their capitalism. It was not a system for mere material gain, but a finely tuned, sophisticated mechanism of survival. Their vast network of trade routes, the seemingly illogical detours, the bizarre exchanges of conceptual shields, and information integrity, all were pieces of a grand interdimensional strategy. Resources were acquired. Exotic matter for nanite fabrication, esoteric knowledge of dimensional physics, and strategic positioning to anchor reality itself. This intricate web of commerce allowed them to maintain their vast nanite swarms and dimensional stabilizers, distributing the burden across countless civilizations without depleting any one of them. It was a cosmic tithe, a self-sustaining defense economy, built over millennia to protect reality itself. Holographic overlays on Nexus Prime's consoles, once showing mundane trade flows, now illuminated complex resource pipelines and strategic deployments, all intrinsically linked to the merchants, seemingly innocuous trade routes. Their capitalism was not primitive. It was the ultimate defense system, operating on a scale the researchers had barely begun to comprehend. A profound silence settled over the command center of Nexus Prime. The lead researcher, their face etched with a mixture of awe and dawning responsibility, finally broke it. All arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, sincere humility. They moved to the primary communication console, discarding all pretense of superiority. The Nexus Prime, with its vast scientific knowledge, its unparalleled computational power, and its unique access to interdimensional resources, was no longer an observer. It was a potential asset. The researcher, once a detached cataloger of lower dimensions, now extended an offer, a desperate plea for collaboration. This was their contribution to the bargain for stability, their offering to the guardians of existence. The holographic display showed the researcher's hand, metaphorically reaching across the void, towards the calm, ancient face of the merchant. It was an unprecedented moment, the hunter offering its tools to the prey it had so arrogantly underestimated. A long, measured pause hung in the interdimensional space, heavy with expectation. Then, the merchant elder on the view screen gave a slow, deliberate nod. Their ancient eyes, which had witnessed countless threats and untold battles, conveyed not gratitude, but a pragmatic acceptance. The offer was taken. An unprecedented alliance, forged not in shared history or cultural affinity, but in the crucible of mutual, existential dread, was formalized. The interdimensional research team of Nexus Prime and the nomadic merchant fleet, once separated by a gulf of perceived technological and intellectual disparity, now stood as partners. Their previous cultural divides, their contrasting approaches to existence, all faded into insignificance before the looming shadow of the true enemy. It was a momentous occasion, a historical shift that would echo across dimensions, uniting former rivals against an impossible foe. The shift was immediate and absolute. Across Nexus Prime and throughout the vast merchant fleet, a furious, urgent pace of preparation began. Researchers, their brilliant minds, now fully engaged with a purpose far grander than mere observation, integrated their advanced scientific knowledge with the merchants' ancient, battle-tested wisdom. Labs on Nexus Prime hummed with the accelerated fabrication of nanite components, while merchant fleet maintenance bays, once bustling with mundane repairs, now thrummed with the calibration of dimensional anchors and the optimization of conceptual defense systems. Joint strategic planning sessions, a fusion of theoretical physics and millennia of practical experience, unfolded across holographic displays. The sheer scale of the combined preparation dwarfed anything Nexus Prime had ever conceived. This was not a minor adjustment. This was a complete reorientation of two civilizations, preparing for a war that would redefine reality itself. As the combined fleet arrayed itself against the encroaching void, the nomadic merchant ships, once dismissed as quaint curiosities, now stood as a crucial bulwark against annihilation. Their bargain was understood, no longer a baffling economic system, but the very price of reality, paid in countless transactions across innumerable dimensions. The interdimensional researchers of Nexus Prime, humbled and irrevocably allied, gazed upon the formidable formation, their sleek vessels now nestled amongst the battle-hardened merchant ships. They understood the true, hidden cost of existence, the relentless, silent war waged by the cosmic capitalists. The threat still lingered, a vast, unseen darkness beyond the newly fortified perimeter. But now, they would face it together. The ultimate trade, reality for survival. The question remained, hanging heavy in the silence of space. Would it be enough?